Let's go into how to actually dissect a job description, specifically industry job descriptions, with some examples, and how to tier your qualifications and figure out which ones to apply to and which ones not to. And that's really because the key thing I want you to take home from this talk, if nothing else, is that it really pays off in the long run to take the time to really understand a job description and tailor a good application to 10 roles that you know that you're very qualified for versus submitting non-tailored applications to 50 roles that you haven't had the time to carefully review and learn about. Really looking at and dissecting job descriptions is going to be a very effective use of your time, even if you end up with less total applications at the end of it. The first thing you want to do is scan the job descriptions you've collected and know the difference between what's a hard stop, and hard stop is something that an industry manager, hiring manager is not likely to be very flexible on when it comes to the candidate they're looking for, and what's open to variation. What are they likely to be a little bit more flexible on? The two major hard stops is going to be industry experience, if they specifically want industry experience, or requiring a different degree level. So if it's specifically looking for a bachelor's degree and you have a PhD, or vice versa, they're not likely to be very flexible on that. Much more likely to be open to variation is going to be total years of experience. Typically, you can apply to roles with about a 2-year window. So if they're asking for 2 years research experience, you can probably apply with minimal experience. If they're asking for 4 years, you can probably apply with 2 years experience. The number of skills met, I really want to make sure that I dispel any misconception that you can only apply to roles that you meet 100% of the qualifications for. That's definitely not the case. You can apply if you meet about 50 to 60% of the qualifications, depending on what they are, and with the understanding that these kind of hard stops are met. Degree type is actually really open to variation. Again, for a molecular biology role, typically they'll mention that they are interested in someone with a degree in molecular biology or a similar STEM-related discipline. So in the STEM field, particularly in biological space, just having a STEM degree and hands-on experience, they'll be very flexible on the degree type, but probably not the level. So let's look at this example that I've pulled from LinkedIn for us to look at. So this is one where you can see right away the hard stop is bachelor's degree. They're looking for bachelor's degree, and because they have it listed like this, they're probably not open to a PhD and maybe not even a master's candidate. We've got two years research experience in academia or industry, so we don't have that industry hard stop. They're not looking for someone who has to have industry experience. And again, they'll probably be somewhat flexible on the year's experience. If you meet a lot of the skills, like if you meet the majority of the skills, I'd still consider applying with less experience. Degree type is fairly flexible. They don't actually list degree type, they just want any bachelor's with some research experience. And they're very, very broad what degree they'd be open to. The other thing you'll notice is job descriptions can be very vague in what they're asking for. If there's a skill section that seems that they're asking for something that's fairly broad, they probably are actually asking for something that's fairly broad. So you'll see things like assay experience. For that, do you have experience using any hands-on analytical method? Count that. Biochemical assays, Western blot, ELISA. Project management is going to be an interesting one that I see come up because it's actually a little bit more specific than what it sounds like. When they ask specifically for project management experience, they likely mean professional project management experience. So informally being in charge of your PhD postdoc project probably would not count. You would want to have evidence of being in charge of a project where you were in charge of setting the deadlines, team management, budget, that kind of thing. Cell assays, if you've had experience with any assessment of live cells reaction to a reagent, even something as simple as like a live dead assay, you would count that. Now, if they say assay development, that's going to be a little different than just using the assays. They mentioned the word development with any kind of these assays, then they want experience either taking an existing assay and heavily modifying it to do something else, or creating an entirely new protocol. And molecular biology skills, I would count yourself in if you have any strong experience with any nucleic acid related techniques. Going into a little bit more detail, the job description, you want to start, I think, by separating the soft skills and the technical skills from what they're asking for. The reason I say this is when we talk about that apply when you meet the majority of the techniques, they're going to, especially for R&D roles, put a lot more emphasis on the technical skills. And so you want to have relatively more of those, or at least when you're deciding whether to apply or not, weight those more heavily than the soft skills, because those are going to weigh more heavily on the hiring manager's mind for these roles than the technical skills. They'll be a lot more flexible typically on soft skills than technical skills, with probably the exception being people management experience, if they're specifically wanting someone with that. And then after you've done this, I would separate the skills by tier. A lot of job descriptions will already do this for you. They'll list their must-have skills and their nice-to-have skills separately, typically. You'll also see these nice-to-haves, these kind of optional skills listed as either other qualifications or desirable skills, like this example here. Any of these desirable, nice-to-have skills, they're not required for the job. They do indicate that you're a strong candidate. Weight those differently when you're seeing if you meet that, say, 60% threshold to apply. If you meet a lot of the qualifications, but a lot of the qualifications that you meet are these desirable skills, and a lot of what you don't meet are the must-haves, then it's probably not the best fit, versus the opposite, where you meet quite a few of the minimum or must-have skills, but very, very few of the desirable or nice-to-have skills. I'd still take the time to apply to that role. And this is particularly why this first consideration. I want to touch on a couple personal considerations to look at. And again, because it's personal, these are not as concrete as the other suggestions that I've given you, because some may be the case for you, some may not, but it's something I think you still want to consider, especially when you're prioritizing which options to apply to. One thing is, you might be happier in a role where you meet 80% of the qualifications rather than one where, looking at the job description on paper, you meet 100%. And it's because you're going to grow more in the one where you meet 80% of the qualifications. You might be happier knowing that you already know how to do everything. Maybe you like that sense of confidence. But would you maybe be happier having a role where there's going to be some learning in a fast-paced environment, where there's going to be some adaptation required? Just something to consider based on what you're looking for in a role. And then also read the responsibilities of the role as well, not just the qualifications, because you want to be certain that it's something that you would enjoy doing. So if we look at this example for a principal scientist, there's developing approaches to evaluate biomarkers, supporting products at all phases, managing and mentoring a team, designing, implementing, and troubleshooting laboratory experiments, partnering with statistical analysts, partnering with a clinical operations team, interacting with multidisciplinary teams, using project management skills to keep projects on track. When you look at this, there's really only one line that's going to be bench skills, and the rest is going to be very management focused, very project management, very people management focused. Is this something that you are interested in? That's something that you want to answer before you decide whether to apply or not. If your answer is, yeah, I'd be maybe okay with learning management, but my passion is really at the bench, it's really in developing these assays, maybe not worth the time that it would take to apply, when you could apply it to a role that has relatively more of what you would be interested in doing. So it's not just about whether you meet the requirements for the role, but when you're reading about responsibilities of the role, is it something you can actually see yourself doing for minimum 2-3 years?